Well, you can even go to the leave it. You can leave it wide open.
Yeah. I know where I'm going.
You need cowbell?
No. I know where I'm going. Should have had the cowbell.
Okay. Start us out.
Oh, it's good to be here again. This is Craig McConnell, and I'm with Alex Burton and Morgan Snyder. We're in the Ransomed Heart studio here, putting together some thoughts and making this podcast that we hope you'll enjoy. What are you guys thinking about? What's current? What's real? And by the way, this is unscripted, unrehearsed. We're just got some mics on, sitting around a table talking.
We've been talking pretty regularly about the decade of the 30s for men and what that's like and what a man's life ought to be about in that decade and what he should be pursuing and what the pitfalls are. And we've been talking about the restoration of masculine character. And one of the pieces of that, Craig, that's just really stuck with me for quite a while is the whole category of humility.
Ah, yes.
That feels religious. It feels misunderstood, misplaced, and just in modern day, Western Christianity, it takes on a passive feel to it.
Humility. You really want to talk about humility?
and yet, I believe that it's at the seat of us becoming men of power and love. Men of true strength on behalf of others. And, I had heard a fascinating definition of humility that was closest to the original Hebrew at a retreat a while back, and it was harnessed strength. The teacher was explaining that the original use of the word humility was to describe a horse that's being broken, a wild, strong, unfettered horse that's being brought under rein so that his strength can be harnessed for good. And I've been around horses just enough to know that they are dangerous, and an unruly horse is a very dangerous thing. And yet a broken horse that's harnessed is an immensely powerful and useful force of good. And boy, that really shifted my perspective on humility, where it's not weakness or passivity. It's rather first knowing you have a genuine strength. And then secondly, knowing how to wield it in self-control. And I'm just so aware of how often I don't lead with humility, that I'm furthering my agenda. I'm not taking the low seat at the table, that I am manipulating, scripting, constructing a life that puts me at the center of the story or a story. And yet I really believe that humility is one of the deepest attributes that God's after to cultivate in young men so they can become good kings. Guys, react to humility.
Well, before we react more, so humility, someone hears this podcast, we're going to be talking about humility. It's kind of like stewardship or holiness or something. Where did this come from in your thinking? That what's behind just, gosh, I want to talk about humility. This is important to me. What's behind that?
I think that's a great question because I think it comes from two places in my story. And one is really the story of Ransomed Heart, where we have learned a powerful ministry comes from offering what we've lived. In other words, Ransomed Heart doesn't offer content that's really creative or powerful in and of itself. We offer our lives, and it's the power of God that comes through a life lived. And so often at Ransomed Heart, we ask ourselves the question is, what can we offer with integrity? What can we do with integrity? And we don't want to offer beyond what we've lived. And I'm aware that in my story, my knowledge supersedes my experience, that I have less miles on the odometer than there are things I know about. I know more than I've lived because I'm in a community with a very deep and substantial message. So I realize the journey for me, and most men in a content-driven, knowledge-based world, need to hit the brakes in a big way and get some more miles on the odometer so that they can live as much as they know rather than the other way around. And I think the second place it comes from, Craig, is I realize what doesn't work. I spent so much of my life trying to make a name for myself, trying to build a kingdom, trying to to be the center of my story. And it is futile. It's empty. It's faithless. In other words, it doesn't require genuine risk, genuine strength. It's not a life that requires God to show up. And I realized I wanted to take God up on the invitation to live a different life, to live a way where God must show up. And so what would it be like for a gifted leader to say, I'm going to choose the lowest seat at the table. I'm going to try the opposite. I'm going to try to arrange for a life that God has to force my hand and raise me up, or else I'm not doing it. And what it does is, I guess, really put me at the mercy of God to father me and author my story. And it feels so risky because there's so many opportunities that I could arrange for a little success, a little influence, a little affluence, and to refrain from that and choose the lowest seat at the table, to choose humility, requires God being author, but the fruit of it is to have a powerful life because you know that God is the energy behind your story and not you.
React, Alex.
Yeah. One of the things as you were talking, Morgan, just about humility being something that can actually help shape strength into a force for good. One of the things I was thinking about is just what we experience when we're at boot camp. You know, one of the primary things that happens there is men get their hearts back, men get free, and learn to start to live out of desire and passion and those things, and those are great things. But what we often see is guys who come out of boot camp, they have this newfound freedom and passion and energy, and then they go out and fight hard and die fast.
Yes.
Like it explodes on them because they don't have the maturity and the growth and the experience to carry this newfound strength.
Yes.
And I think we all find ourselves so many times at the end of those boot camps wanting to tell guys, hey, just go back, take some time, let this sink in, process it. Don't rush the fields and, fight bravely and die quickly.
Yeah.
And I think that's true of the decade of the 30s as well. For me, as I've you and I have talked about humility and taking that lowest seat at the table as a way of acknowledging, no, I'm really in a season of growth here, and I don't have to create a kingdom right now. For me, it takes the pressure off. It's been huge for me to go, wow, I don't have to, create something that I don't feel prepared to create right now. To be able to just go, no, this really is a season of growth and learning for me, and a place for me to receive from men who are ahead of me on that journey. So,
Morgan, Alex, does coming to the end of trying to build something and failing or not being satisfied with it precede humility? I mean, can humility really be appreciated and sought apart from some failure, coming to the end of something? I mean, why would someone choose humility unless the other avenues have failed?
Yes. Craig, when my wife was struggling with some deep health issues 2 years ago, I just was a broken man, and I was really humiliated was the word, because I was trying to figure out, well, how did we get here? What did I do wrong? And one of the fruits of that experience was that I realized it seems like every man either can choose at some point in his story humility or humiliation. In other words, there's no shortcut around this. A woman walked up to me in the park that summer, not knowing what was going on in my life, and she said, hey, I just felt moved to give you this quote from Tozer, and it said that a man cannot be entrusted with greatness until he's been crushed. She had no idea what was going on through my story. And she had no idea I was in the midst of being crushed. And over the last couple years, I've seen this pattern in so many of the lives of the men we deal with at our retreats, that until a man has been crushed, until he's been humiliated, or he's chosen humility through loss, through suffering, through failure, he doesn't have ears to hear and receive what God's trying to bring in some substantive ways. So I would suggest that we can wait until God has to humiliate us, or we can choose humility. But those are the only two paths that lead to true, full masculine restoration.
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering, for most people out there, choosing humility. It kind of has the ring of, well, I'll choose to be patient, or I'll choose to be kind. And it's like, what? Do people really choose humility? Can they actually do that? Or is it something that just comes by God just bringing us to a point of, you use the word crushed or broken, or just seeing the foolishness or the harmful way we've lived? I'd love your thought there. Choosing humility.
Well, in some ways, I'd respond with a question that I often take to God. A question I think every man should is my strength yielded to God? Is it harnessed? I remember years ago, I was at John's house, and at the time, all three of his boys were really little, and his oldest, Samuel, was just beating on Luke. I mean, this is a regular happenings at their house, beating on him. Thump. And so John pulls Samuel aside, and he said, Samuel, God made you strong for a reason. And that reason is to use your strength to protect your brother and not hurt him. Yeah. And it was this radical paradigm shift for me. Rather than parenting out of anger, rather than attacking Sam or commenting on who Sam was, he said, God has given you this strength. Now use it for good. Yeah. And to me, Craig, I think partly what I mean by choosing humility is understanding and cultivating a genuine strength, and then saying, Father, I am yielding my strength to you. It's at your service. It's under control.
Right. Yeah, that's good. And what you're describing there is being fathered by an example of an older man.
Absolutely.
And though you may not call it asking for or choosing humility, that posture of surrender to God, that all that I have is yours, direct it, take it, and just search my heart in some way, is choosing humility.
Yes.
A posture of humility towards God will bring a posture of humility towards life. I'm asking.
Yeah.
Apparently that was a profound.
That was profound.
That's deep. I'm chewing on it like your protein bar right here.
Morgan
chewing.
Like stunned.
Yeah. My experience, what I experienced in this area was a time in life before I came to Ransom Heart where I was in a position to continue down a path of gaining more responsibility and more of a position of kingship. If I had stayed in the place I was, the next step for me would have been to arrange for life in a way that would have given me, greater kingship. And for me, there was a choosing of humility. I could have arranged for that, or I could have sat down and said, okay, God, what do you want? Where do you want to take me? And that's what I did, was sat down with God and said, what do you want? Where do you want to take me? And it led me here to Ransom Heart. And so I think there really is a choosing in that sense.
It's good.
And ultimately, I think every man wants to be powerful. I think what we're talking about is how does a man become powerful? How does a man become fully alive, fully strong, to live out the destiny that is on his life? And true humility, not religious humility, but true humility of harnessed strength, of power surrendered to God, is what the Father's after in us. And when you look at Philippians, it describes that at the core of Jesus, who was the most powerful man who ever lived, his essence is humility. That, he humbled himself to the greatest obedience, even death on a cross. And the fruit of that was that God exalted him to the highest place. And yet, when he was exalted, he was a man who knew that my life is for others. And so I want to be that man. I know Alex does. I know you do, Craig. And I think my prayer for all of the men out there is those small, subtle choices on the level of motive. Mm-hmm. Am I building my own kingdom?
Right.
Or am I allowing God to restore and transform my character and make me a man of humility and all of the attributes of a wholehearted man, so that I can truly become the man that God intended for me to be?
Thank you for joining us. We're here next week, same place. For more information, go to ransomedheart.com. That was good.